I'll go ahead and call us to order and declare that we have a quorum of 6 members. Item C, receive a presentation related to the accelerated instruction for end-of-course exams 2017-18. Dr. Ely.
Mr. Harris, members of the board, we're here for a public hearing to review the results of our students who took subsequent administrations of end-of-course exams at the high school level. We are, one of the requirements that we have in the state is to provide a report to the Board of Trustees in open session and talking about the results of our work to accelerate instruction or prepare our students for subsequent administrations of these exams. So we have Mrs. Molly Perry, Chief Administrative Officer, here to share the report on how our students did and how we did in providing services for our students during the 17-18 school year. And so with that, Mrs. Perry.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Ely. Good evening. As Dr. Lee mentioned, we're going to walk through the results of our accelerated instruction program for our end-of-course exams this summer. As you may recall, annually, just about this time, we look at this because we are required as a school district to provide accelerated instruction, more commonly understood as remediation, for students who do not pass their STAR tests. Now, specifically with end-of-course exams, those are necessary for graduation, and so students can retake those exams as many times as they might need to, and they might need to participate in accelerated instruction during times not only in the school day, but also after school. So in the summer, that looks like actually coming up and being involved in those accelerated instruction programs. And we are here tonight because under a statute in Texas, we are required to provide a public hearing related to the effectiveness of our programs. So as a quick reminder, our students do take end-of-course exams in 5 areas. And this slide should look familiar because you saw it back this summer when we were looking at preliminary STAR results. And so you can see across the bottom, we've got English 1, English 2, Algebra 1, Biology, and then U.S. History. In blue, you'll see the state results in terms of the percent of students who hit that approaches or higher standard relative to College Station ISD performance in red. So already we do have a smaller proportion of students needing accelerated instruction than many districts throughout the state due to our student performance. So I'm going to walk you through participation. So we've got those content subject area tests on the left and the actual numbers, not just percentage, of students who did not meet that standard during the spring administration, which happens in May. So of those students, they can subsequently attend summer sessions and then take the administration in June. They could take the administration later in August, which we are not covering this evening, or next December, or even the following spring. So there is some flexibility. So when you see those numbers of students attending the summer accelerated instruction, they do look quite low relative to that, but not all students are necessarily retesting in June due to availability. And some of those students actually go through alternative methods for meeting the passing standard. So the next column is looking at of those students who did attend in our June summer accelerated instruction program, how many tested. Just because you attend doesn't necessarily mean that ultimately you do move forward and take that test, but of those that attended and tested, finally you can see what the number of students who actually met the standard looks like. So that just kind of gives you an overall idea of students participating in which content areas. Now, this is a chart that also lists the content areas, and you'll see we've got some highlighted columns. And we're looking at the percentage of students who passed in that late June administration. But we're going to compare now, the left shaded column is the percent who passed of students who actually did not attend. They tested, but they didn't come and participate in those summer tutorials. And then on the right, the students who did attend. And so immediately you'll notice, especially in the area of algebra and biology, and to a lesser degree, but still significant in English 1 and 2, we saw improved performance. U.S. history is a little bit of an outlier this year. We have very, very small numbers, and there were some unique circumstances surrounding those particular students individually. So was it effective? Well, this is a little bit different way of looking at that. So looking at that spring administration to June, what was the average number of questions that a student either got right as an increase or a decrease. And so of the students who attended, you can easily see that definitely they showed greater growth from spring to June administration. So that's another positive indicator that the program was helping those students to improve their scores. Then looking at whether or not we're improving over time. Every year as we talk about this, we kind of talk about, next year we're thinking about doing something a little bit different, or these are the things that were challenges. And so I thought it was really interesting to be able to see the performance of those students who attended in 2017 relative to last year. And again, we saw some really good gains, especially in algebra. Biology was pretty consistent year over year, but good gains in English 1 and 2 to some degree. Again, those are more challenging tests overall. You'll notice at the beginning those passing rates were lower. And then again, U.S. history a little different this year with very, very small numbers. This is that same data just in a graphical representation to see kind of the most significant growth was really in algebra. So this year, in thinking about our challenges, and this is always on the list, student participation. It is summer, and there are not only plans for work, but travel, and just getting motivated to come back to school after you've completed a year is a challenge. We do have this program offered for all of our students at one location, and we've really consolidated forces, and I have to pause and really give Mr. McKeever big props for not only implementing a great program, but helping to gather such useful data for us to consider. But participation is something that is an ongoing challenge for our summer program. The other piece of this is really being able to drill down and figure out what these students need. Of course, we have curriculum-based information, but STAR is a very different animal, as we've talked about frequently. And in terms of the timeline, I've listed it there because I think it gives a better picture. So we test in that second week of May. We know if a student has met the standard or not at the very beginning of June, but we're beginning that summer accelerated instruction within a few days. Well, knowing if a student passed or not is not really knowing what they need to work on. And so as we move through the course of instruction, we do get final results, but ultimately, we don't have that item analysis summary until after the retest has already happened. And so it's a little tricky to really drill down, and so we're using data that is older and not necessarily on these students to look for trends and needs. So thinking about moving towards next year, what might we adjust to continue improving those results? Well, we're going to do what's working, certainly in algebra and biology. And then we've seen some good gains in English, but in brainstorming, the teachers really felt like if we met fewer days but had longer sessions, we might really be able to get deeper and get better participation because students aren't having to come as frequently. Similarly, in U.S. history, our participation was a little lower in there, and those students are typically older. We're taking that test as a junior most often, and so it is a little harder to get participation when students are more engaged in things like work. But again, we're thinking maybe fewer but longer sessions might get better participation for history. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have or entertain any comments.
Thank you. Questions, comments?
As always, a good presentation. You had mentioned that there's some other alternative activities that students are doing for remediation. Mm-hmm. What are some of those, just for curiosity's sake?
Yes, so there actually are several alternatives for students who do not meet the standard on their end-of-course exam. One of those is using a substitute assessment like the PSAT or the TSI or the SAT or ACT even. There are minimum standard scores depending on the subject on those tests that can actually be substituted in as having passed an EOC. For students who only have one or two EOCs that they have not passed, in order to meet graduation requirements, we can convene that individualized graduation committee and look at alternative requirements for those students as well.
Are there any needs that we can help provide or help raise through our community, like the Education Foundation? Like pizza to get kids there, whatever it may be that you come up with.
Yeah, that's definitely worth consideration. I know incentivizing students to come to school when it's not mandatory is definitely a challenge. So that's Mr. McKeevers, I think, is here tonight, so we can certainly look at that.
Yeah, I would say do that and bring those ideas, because I know people in the community would definitely be willing to help, and we as a board would as well. And then you mentioned it briefly. Is there anything you think we need to be concerned about U.S. history? I mean, 0% is still 0%.
Right.
So-
Our overall rates look pretty good for U.S.
Okay.
history, and really in kind of talking about that individual student
got it.
level,
Got
we
it.
really think that there were some extenuating circumstances. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Anything left on that? If not, we'll move to receive public comment. Do we have any cards or public speakers? Okay, well then with that, we will adjourn this hearing and be back in 2 to 3 minutes.